When I was a child, the land was my whole world. My father said the land never lies. He said if we worked hard, the earth would feed us. But I also saw the land crack and dry in the sun, and I saw how hunger could make people forget kindness. We lived in a small village near the city. From our roof, I could see tall buildings far away, but they looked like another country. The city had light, sound, and easy money. Our village had dust, old houses, and a well that often ran dry. My name is Lynn. I grew up helping my parents in the field. We planted rice and sweet potatoes, but the soil was poor and the weather was cruel. My father worked until his back curved like a bow. My mother cooked, washed, and cared for us. When I turned 15, my mother became sick. There was no hospital near us, and the city hospital was too expensive. I watched her lie on the floor with a small lamp next to her face. She whispered that I should be strong. She said, "The land will save you, Lynn. Never leave it." I did not understand then, but I remembered her words. After my mother died, my father stopped talking much. He worked alone and grew thinner each month. When I was 20, he said I should marry. He could no longer manage the field himself. There was a man from the next village who wanted a wife. His name was Bao. He was quiet and not rich, but he worked hard. My father thought that was enough. I did not love Bao, but I agreed. I knew life was not made for love stories. Before we continue, I would love to know something. Where are you listening from? Which country or city? I always feel curious to imagine the people who hear these stories. And if you are enjoying this one, please subscribe to hear more each week. Bao and I began our life in a small brick house with one old roof that leaked when it rained. Every morning before sunrise, I carried water from the well while Bao prepared the ox. The soil near our house was dry, but we worked every part of it. I felt proud when I saw green shoots rise through the dust. Bao never spoke much, but sometimes he smiled when the plants grew strong. That small smile gave me strength. In those days, food was always a worry. Some nights we ate only rice water, but when I looked at our small field, I felt safe. The earth did not speak, but I could feel its heart beating under my feet. Each season had its pain, but also its promise. When the rains came late, I worked harder. When the sun burned my skin, I thought of my mother's words. The land would save me. After 2 years, I gave birth to our first child, a boy. We called him Hao. I remember holding him for the first time and feeling both fear and joy. I wanted him to have a better life than ours, but I also wanted him to love the earth as I did. Bao looked proud but said nothing. He began to work even harder, hoping we could buy more land one day. I returned to the field 1 week after giving birth. My hands were weak, but the plants did not wait. When I looked at Hao sleeping under the tree, I felt that every seed I planted was for him. Then one summer, everything changed. The rain did not come at all. The land became gray and cracked. Our ox died of heat and hunger. Bao went to the city to find work, but he could not get a job. He came home with empty hands and a heavy face. We sold our few chickens to buy rice. Some families left the village for good, but I stayed. I believed that if I left the land, I would lose myself. I took a shovel and worked alone, trying to save whatever crops I could. Every handful of soil was dry and sharp like stone. One evening, I sat on the ground and cried. My clothes were covered with dust. My hands bled. I looked at the empty field and asked myself why I was still trying. Then I saw Hao playing with a small clay figure he had made. His laughter broke the silence. At that moment, I felt a fire inside me. I promised myself that I would never let my child go hungry, no matter what happened. When the next month came, I went to the city market to sell vegetables from the small part of the field that had survived. The city was noisy and full of people in clean clothes. They did not look at me. My hands were rough and my clothes were torn, but I stood by the road with my basket. Some people bought from me, some laughed. I did not care. I earned enough to buy a little rice and salt. I felt proud when I returned home with food for Bao and Hao. The next year, I learned to grow a new kind of crop that used less water. I asked old farmers for advice and watched how the city gardens grew flowers even in the heat. I mixed my ideas with what I knew from the land. Slowly, the earth began to give back. The plants were small, but they were alive. People who had laughed at me began to ask questions. I shared what I knew, and they helped me build a new water line from the hill. As the years passed, we worked and saved every small coin. I kept a box under the floor where I hid our savings. Bao wanted to use it to buy a small motorcycle, but I refused. I said, "The land first." He did not argue. One morning, I took the box to the old man who sold land papers. We bought another small piece of field near the river. It was the first land I owned in my name. I stood there and felt the wind on my face. The ground was wet and rich. I pressed my hand into the soil and thought of my mother. When our second child, a daughter, was born, I named her May. I wanted her to be strong and gentle like the spring rain. Life became easier little by little. We had food, clothes, and sometimes I could buy fruit for the children. But the world around us was changing. The city was growing fast, and new roads reached our village. Men came in white cars and said they wanted to buy our land for a factory. Some people sold their fields and became rich for a short time. Bao said we should sell too, but I said no. The land had given me everything. I could not betray it. One night, I sat outside with May on my lap and watched the city lights in the distance. They looked close now, brighter than before. I felt both proud and afraid. The world was moving forward, and I was still holding the old earth in my hands. But I knew who I was. I was the woman of this soil. I had built my life from dust, and no city light could blind me from that truth. Before I continue with the story, please like, subscribe, share, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from. Your support means a lot. Now, let's continue. The year after May was born, everything around us started to change. The city moved closer, like water rising after the rain. New roads were built, and big trucks began to pass near our village. At first, I was happy, 'cause it meant we could go to the market faster. But then the air became dirty and the water turned brown. I looked at the sky, and it seemed smaller every day. Men from the city came again. They wore clean shirts and spoke quickly. They told us we could sell our land for a high price. They said we could move into a new apartment in the city. They talked about shops, hospitals, and schools. Some of my neighbors signed their papers that same day. I saw them leave with smiles and bags of money. But when I looked at my fields, I could not imagine leaving them behind. The earth had been my mother, my teacher, and my home. I said no. Bao did not agree with me. He said the land was old and the city was the future. He said we could open a small shop and send Hao and Mei to a better school. I listened but did not answer. That night, I lay awake beside him and watched the shadows move across the ceiling. I thought about what he said, but my heart was full of fear. I was afraid that if we sold the land, we would lose more than soil. We would lose ourselves. The next morning, Bao was quiet. He stopped helping me in the field as much as before. He began to visit the city every week. He said he was looking for work, but I knew he was also thinking about the offer. One evening, he came home with a new shirt. He told me a man in the city gave him a job in a warehouse. I asked him if he liked it, and he said yes because the pay was better than farming. From that day, he spent more time in the city than at home. I worked alone in the fields. Hao helped me when he could, but he was now a student and had to study. Mei was small and followed me everywhere. Sometimes she sat on the edge of the field and made little houses from stones and sticks. I liked watching her play. Her laughter made the long days easier. The wind was softer when she smiled. Months passed, and Bao sent money home from the city. It helped us, but I began to feel something was changing between us. When he came home, he brought new things: a small radio, city clothes, and food that smelled of oil and sugar. He looked stronger but different. He spoke fast and sometimes forgot to ask about the fields. One night he said that farming was a waste of time. He said we could have a real life if we sold everything and moved to the city. I told him the land still gave us food. He shook his head and said I was blind. I did not want to fight. I loved my family more than anything, but I also loved the earth that had raised me. Every plant I grew felt like a child. I remembered my mother's voice and her words about the land. I could not leave it. A few months later, something strange happened. Bao came home and told me that one of our neighbors had become rich after selling his land. He bought a car and a new house in the city. Bao looked at me as if I was the reason he did not have the same life. I said that money comes and goes, but the land stays. He laughed without smiling and went to sleep. Days turned into weeks, and Bao's visits became shorter. I told myself it was work, but in my heart I knew there was more. The city had taken him in a way I could not stop. One evening I found a letter in his bag. It was from a woman who worked at the same warehouse. She wrote that she missed him and hoped to see him again soon. My hands shook as I read it. I did not tell him I had seen it. I only watched him quietly as he packed his things for another week in the city. That night, after he left, I went outside. The stars were hidden behind smoke. The field was quiet. I felt pain, but also calm. I told myself that I still had my children and my land. I would not beg anyone to stay. The next morning, I woke early and went to the river. I washed my face and looked at my reflection. My skin was brown and lined, my eyes dark and clear. I told myself that I was not weak. When the next planting season came, I hired 2 young men from another village to help me. They worked hard, and soon the field was green again. The new crops were healthy, and the harvest was good. I sold the vegetables in the market and earned enough to fix the roof. Hao was growing fast and became one of the best students in his school. Mei learned to read by sitting beside her brother every night. I felt proud of them. They were my reason to keep going. but Bao's visits grew fewer. Sometimes he sent money, sometimes not. Once he came home with gifts for the children, but said little to me. I saw sadness in his eyes, but I did not ask questions. I had learned that silence was stronger than anger. Then one day, he did not come home at all. Weeks passed. I went to the city to look for him. The noise there hurt my ears. I walked through the crowded streets and asked at the warehouse. A man there told me Bao had left months ago. Nobody knew where he went. I felt my heart sink. I went home that evening and sat beside the children. Hao asked me if his father was coming back. I said I did not know. That night I did not sleep. I thought of all the years I had worked beside Bao and all the days we had shared. I cried for the man he had been, not the one he had become. In the morning, I went to the field and began to work again. I decided that my life could not stop because of loss. The next few years were quiet. I became known in the market for my vegetables. People called me the woman of the good earth because my crops were always fresh and strong. I liked that name. It reminded me that even in sadness, the land still gave life. Hao finished school and said he wanted to go to the city for college. My heart felt heavy, but I told him he should go. I wanted him to have choices that I never had. May stayed with me and helped on the farm. Sometimes I missed Bao, but the pain became softer with time. I learned to smile again. When I saw the sun rise over the field, I felt thankful. I knew that my hands had built something strong, something that no one could take away. Then one evening, a letter arrived. It was from Bao. He wrote that he was sorry for leaving and wanted to come home. He said he was sick and had no one. My heart was full of confusion. Part of me was angry, but another part remembered the young man who once worked beside me in the dust. I showed the letter to Hao and May. Hao said I should forgive him. May said it was my choice. I waited for a few days before answering. When I finally wrote back, I said he could come home if he truly wanted to. But I also said that things had changed. I was not the same woman he had left. The land had made me strong. When Bao returned, he looked thin and tired. He did not speak much. I gave him food and let him rest. The children were quiet around him. For many days, he stayed inside the house, saying little. One morning, I found him sitting outside, looking at the field. His eyes were full of tears. He said, "You kept it alive." I said, "The land kept me alive." He nodded slowly and said nothing more. That night, I felt peace. For the first time in many years, I was not angry or afraid. I looked at my house, my children, and my field. Everything was built with my hands, with my heart, with dust and hope. The morning after Bao came home, the house was quiet. I heard the wind moving through the dry grass behind the house. It had been many years since he had slept there. His breathing was soft and tired. I sat by the window and watched the sunlight move across the floor. I felt both peace and sadness. It was strange to have him near again after so much time, but it was also strange that I felt no anger anymore. The pain of the past had lost its sharpness. It was like a scar that no longer hurt, but still remained. The next weeks passed slowly. Bao did not go to the city again. He stayed with me and helped in small ways when he could. His body was weak, and he often coughed at night. The city had not been kind to him. I could see that he had worked too hard and eaten too little. I cooked for him and tried to help him recover. Sometimes we sat outside together in silence. It was not the silence of anger anymore. It was quiet like the earth after the rain. One afternoon, while I was cleaning the rice, Bao said something I never expected. He said, "I was wrong." His voice was low and tired. I thought the city would give me everything I wanted, but it only took everything away. I looked at him and saw how thin he had become. He looked smaller, almost like the young man I had married years ago, but with eyes full of regret. I did not know what to say, so I said nothing. I only kept cleaning the rice. After a while, "Yam said Kinsoe, you were right to stay. The land never left you, and now you have everything I tried to find." I still did not speak. My heart was full, but my words stayed quiet inside me. When the next planting season came, Bao wanted to help. I told him to rest, but he insisted. He could not lift heavy things anymore. But he sat near the field and watched me work. Sometimes he called out advice or pointed to the rows of plants. It was like the old days when we worked together. The children liked seeing him outside again. Hao visited from the city when he could. He had become a young man, full of ideas and dreams. He talked about machines that could help farmers and clean water systems that could bring life to dry villages. When I heard him speak, I felt proud. I knew that our work and pain had built the road for him. May stayed with me and worked on the land. She was strong and clever, and she understood the soil better than I did at her age. She often said that one day she wanted to open a small business selling our vegetables directly to city markets. I liked her idea, but I also told her not to forget the value of the earth. She smiled and said she would never forget. One evening, I sat with Bao outside as the sun went down. The air was golden, and the rice fields looked alive. The sound of crickets filled the night. He looked at the sky for a long time, then said, "Do you remember when we built this house?" I said yes. He smiled a little. We were poor, but we were together. I looked at him carefully. His face had deep lines, and his eyes were tired but kind. I said, "We were never poor, Bao. We had the land. We had our hands. That was enough." He nodded and said, "You have always been stronger than me." I felt my eyes fill with tears, but I did not cry. I had cried enough in my life. Now there was only peace. A few months later, Bao's health became worse. The doctor from the town said he had lung disease. The medicine was expensive, but I used my savings without regret. I could not save him, but I could care for him. He spent his last days in the small room near the field. Every morning I sat beside him and told him about the weather, the plants, and the children. Sometimes he smiled. Sometimes he said he was sorry again. I told him there was no need to be sorry anymore. One night, while the rain was falling softly outside, he closed his eyes and did not wake again. When I buried him under the big tree near our house, I did not feel alone. I felt that he had gone back to the same earth that had carried us all these years. I stood there for a long time and listened to the rain. The air smelled clean and full of life. I whispered to the ground that I would keep working, that I would not stop. After that, the seasons passed quietly. The land was kinder for a few years. The crops were strong, and the market paid well. I built a new shed and repaired the roof again. Hao finished his studies and got a good job in the city. He often came home on weekends to help. May grew into a beautiful woman, and started her small vegetable business as she had dreamed. She spoke with buyers from restaurants and schools. People respected her. I watched her grow and felt proud. One day, Hao told me that he wanted to build a clean water system for our village. He said he wanted to give something back to the place that raised him. I saw in him the same spirit I once had when I fought to keep our land alive. I told him I was proud of him. He said, "I learned it from you, Mother." The years went by. My hands grew older and slower, but I still woke early each day. I walked through the fields and touched the plants. The smell of the soil still made me feel young. When the wind blew through the rice, it sounded like a song. Sometimes I sat by Bao's grave and spoke to him quietly. I told him about the harvest, the children, and the grandchildren who now ran around the field laughing. Life had gone on, as it always does. I often thought about the people who had sold their land years ago. Some of them had lived in the city for a time but later came back with empty pockets. They looked older than I remembered. They said the city had promised them everything, but had given them nothing. When I looked at them, I felt both sadness and gratitude. I knew I had made the right choice when I decided to stay. One evening, I sat alone outside the house. The sky was turning red and gold. The fields were quiet, and the air smelled of earth and rain. I thought about my mother's words from so many years ago. She had said that the land would save me. I finally understood what she meant. The land had not only fed me, it had taught me patience, courage, and strength. It had held me up when people left me. It had been a friend when the world turned cold. As the light faded, I looked at my hands. They were old and rough, but they had built everything I loved. They had planted hope in the soil, cared for children, and buried pain. I smiled. I was not afraid of the future anymore. The land would stay. It would hold my children and their children. It would remember all of us who worked with love and faith. That night, I slept with the window open. The wind came through, bringing the smell of wet soil. I dreamed of the first small house Bao and I built, the dry fields, the days of hunger, and the years of plenty. I dreamed of my mother's face and her voice. When I woke in the morning, I felt calm. The world was simple again. I went outside, took a handful of soil, and let it fall slowly through my fingers. It was soft and warm. I realized that everything I was had come from that soil. My strength, my love, my pain, and my peace. I had built my life from dust, and in that dust I had found my soul. The land had never been only earth. It had been the heart of my life, and I knew it always would be. If you liked my story, please like, comment a must and shares.